রজনী হোক মহোৎসবান, সফল করো হে প্রভু আজি সভান। অভয় দ্বার তব করো হে অবারিত, অমৃত উৎস তব করো উৎসারিত, গগনে গগনে করো প্রসারিত। অতি বিচিত্র তব নিত্য শোভা, অভয় দ্বার তব করো হে অবারিত, অমৃত উৎস তব করো উৎসারিত, গগনে গগনে করো প্রসারিত। অতি বিচিত্র তব নিত্য শোভা, সব ভকতে তব আনো এ পরিষদে, বিমুখ চিত্ত যত করো নত তব পদে। সব ভকতে তব আনো এ পরিষদে, বিমুখ চিত্ত যত করো নত তব পদে। রাজপধীশ্বর তব চির সম্পদে, সব সম্পদ করো হত গৌরবান, সফল করো হে প্রভু আজি সভা। রজনী হোক মহোৎসবান, সফল করো হে প্রভু আজি সভা, সফল করো হে প্রভু আজি সভা।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ। সমিতির আমাদের এই যে শতবর্ষ উদযাপনের সমাপ্তি পর্বের অনুষ্ঠান, এই অনুষ্ঠানে আমাদের যে প্রথম অধিবেশন এবং পরবর্তীকালে আমাদের আজকে মেঘনাথ সাহা প্রেক্ষাগৃহে এই যে শতবার্ষিকী বক্তৃতার আয়োজন, তার সবটাই জুড়ে রয়েছে জ্ঞানচর্চার পরিসর। সুদীর্ঘ 100 বছরের ইতিহাস আমাদের এই সমিতির, নানা পর্ব পর্বান্তর, দেশভাগ, মন্বন্তর, দ্বিতীয় বিশ্বযুদ্ধ, জাতিদাঙ্গা এবং পরবর্তীকালে স্বাধীন ভারতের বিভিন্ন পর্ব পর্বান্তরের সাক্ষী আমাদের এই সমিতি। এবং আধুনিক ভারতবর্ষের যে পুরাধা চিন্তাবিদ, দার্শনিক এবং সাহিত্যিক, তিনি যে কথা বলেছেন সেটাই সমিতির মন্ত্র। জ্ঞান যেথা মুক্ত, যেথা গৃহের প্রাচীর, আপন প্রাঙ্গন্তরে দিবস সর্বরি, বসুধারে রাখে নাহি খণ্ডপুত্র করি। তাই আজকের এই শতবার্ষিকী বক্তৃতার বিষয় হিসাবে আমরা এমন একটি বিষয় যা গণতন্ত্রের চতুর্থ স্তম্ভ হিসাবে সম্মানিত, আদৃত আমাদের দেশের এই প্রজাতন্ত্রে, সেই সাংবাদিকতার ভবিষ্যৎ, সেই সাংবাদিকতার বর্তমান পরিসর, কলোনাইজেশন অফ নলেজ, হাউ টু উই লিবারেট, এই বিষয় নিয়ে আমাদের আজকের এই আলোচনা সভা। আপনারা সবাই জানেন বক্তা শ্রী পি সাইনাথ, বিশিষ্ট নোবেলজয়ী অর্থনীতিবিদ অমর্ত্য সেন, যাকে পরিচিত করতে গিয়ে বলেছেন, মন্বন্তর এবং ক্ষুধার ইতিহাস নিয়ে এত বড় কাজ আমি খুব কম দেখেছি। আমাদের আরেক কবি বলেছিলেন, ক্ষুধার রাজ্যে পৃথিবী গদ্যময়। উনি সেই ক্ষুধার রাজ্যের মানুষদের গল্প শুনিয়েছেন, গ্রাম ভারতবর্ষের গল্প শুনিয়েছেন। মন্বন্তরের ক্ষেত্রে তার যে রাজনীতি এবং মনুষ্য সৃষ্ট মন্বন্তরের বিভিন্ন ধরনের যে পাওয়ার পলিটিক্স, সেই ইতিহাসের, সেই বৃত্তান্তের, সেই দস্তাবেজ তিনি রচনা করেছেন। তাই এভরিবডি লাভস আ গুড ড্রট, সকলেই একটি ভালো মন্বন্তর পছন্দ করতে পারে শীর্ষক তার যে সন্দর্ভ, তার যে আলোচনা, তার যে গ্রন্থ, তা আজকে দেশ ছাড়িয়ে আন্তর্জাতিক বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, স্বীকৃত বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়গুলির ক্ষেত্রেও অবশ্য পাঠ্য। তাকে পরিচয় করাবেন আনুষ্ঠানিকভাবে আমাদের সমিতির সভাপতি অধ্যাপক শুভদয় দাশগুপ্ত।
On behalf of West Bengal College and University Teachers Association, we welcome Mr. Palagummi Sainath, who is popularly known as P. Sainath. And before I introduce him to you, a few words to him on behalf of Vedkuta. This is basically our short history. Founded 100 years ago, Vedkuta has been one of the oldest and most respected teachers' organizations in the country. As a multi-tendency democratic association comprising teachers with diverse ideological perspectives, it has consistently worked towards the advancement of higher education, promotion of academic excellence, safeguarding of professional rights and dignity of teachers, and the strengthening of the educational system in West Bengal and India. The founder president of our heritage organization being none other than the illustrious scholar Acharya Prafullo Chandra Rai, and guided through various phases by eminent luminaries such as Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, Dr. Syama Prasad Mukherjee, Nobel laureate C.V. Raman, and Dr. Meghnad Shah. And now, a few words about P. Sainath for our audience. He is the founder editor of the People's Archive of Rural India, PARI, a journalist for 45 years and a full-time rural reporter for 33. Sainath has won over 70 professional awards, including the Magsaysay Prize 2007 and the Fukuoka Grand Prize 2021. He was also the first winner of Amnesty International's Global Human Rights Journalism Award 2000 in its inaugural year. He has turned down every state award he has been offered because Sainath believes journalists should never accept prizes and rewards from the governments they cover and critique. Those he has declined include the Padma Bhushan 2009 and the Rs 1 million YSR Award 2021 of the government of Andhra Pradesh. He is also the journalist ever to have won the P.V. Sukhatme Gold Medal awarded by the Indian Social Science Academy at the 45th Indian Social Sciences Congress at Chennai 2022. Sainath's book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, was declared a Penguin Classic in 2013. All royalties of this bestseller, now in its 67th print, go each year in prizes to rural people, rural reporters writing in Indian languages. His latest book, The Last Heroes, Foot Soldiers of Indian Freedom, 6th print on India's anti-colonial freedom struggle, brings in a new innovation, linking books, journalism, and the People's Archive of Rural India. It recorded the life stories of 16, then still alive, now only 3 remaining, include farmers, laborers, cooks, couriers, carpenters, and more. 4 of them are, I beg your pardon, 3 of them are still alive, and each of these stories carry a QR code that, when scanned, takes the reader to a freedom fighters gallery on Pari, where they can see videos and photo albums of each fighter. Since 1993, Sainath has spent on an average around 270 days a year in India's poorest regions, writing from there for newspapers like Times of India and for The Hindu, where he was rural editor for a decade. His path-breaking reporting placed India's ongoing agrarian crisis and farmer suicides, over 450,000 since 1995, on the national agenda. P. Sainath is presently Andrew D. White Professor at Large, Cornell University, and Distinguished Professor, Nalsar University of Law, Hyderabad. Due to the paucity of time, I am not reading out his other capacities in which he is serving various institutions. So with this brief introduction, may I now request P. Sainath, our beloved guest, to deliver his centenary lecture of Webkuta, Colonization of Knowledge, How Do You Liberate? This is the topic he is going to address. Over to Mr. Sainath. Please come.
আপনারা মোবাইল ফোনগুলো একটু সাইলেন্ট মোডে রেখে দেবেন কাইন্ডলি।
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be delivering the centenary lecture of an institution that has seen the likes of Meghnad Saha, and I'm told J.C. Bose lived next door. Yeah, that is really an honor. Thank you for that. And, as we gather here today, the police have issued directives to all social media platforms to take down any post critical of or hostile to constitutional heads, meaning you should not dare criticize President, Prime Minister, Speaker, Chief Justice, even if you have the constitutional right to do so. The Constitution gives you that right. But you are now told that in fact, the head of Meta, Facebook, has been summoned. He's come to India to face the music about that. And I can tell you one thing very surely, he will cave in completely. He has done this 100 times before. He comes in, caves in, gives more power to the government. There's a reason for that. India is one of the biggest revenue yielding markets for Facebook. Probably the largest revenue yielder to Facebook in the world. Why is he going to, stand up for freedom of speech? Oh, forget all that stuff. In India, I maintain that there has never been, and it's a common wisdom in the journalist fraternity, in India there has never been a problem of freedom of speech. In India the problem is freedom after the speech. So that I know on 15th August 2020, on 23rd August 2023, my ultimate achievement, which is not listed in the bio, was my 15 seconds of fame when a union cabinet minister held up a blow-up of my portrait on the floor of Parliament, condemning me as the mastermind behind the anti-farmer activity in the country. Of course, the union minister, cabinet minister was Smriti Irani. It was, if it was not so terrifying, because you'd be mad not to be scared of these guys. They're insane. Yeah, but scared, you know, if it weren't so scary, it would have been quite, you would have, in a detached way, looked at it as cleverly done. What she did, she took a blow-up of my photograph, blew it up from the Congress Facebook page, which is the first I ever got to know that the Congress had me on their Facebook page. They had no reason to, for 3 decades. And she turned to the cameras in the Lok Sabha because she then did not have to name me. She did not violate House rules by naming a person not present to defend himself, by simply maneuvering the poster at the TV cameras. And I have that 15-second clip because I was traveling in rural Rajasthan and the calls were coming in. You know, very worried, my friends, converts, very, very worried and saying, you know, aap abhi don't go home today. Anyway, I was sitting in rural Rajasthan. Don't go home today, or if you're in Jaipur, don't come to Delhi. So of course I was scared, but the only thing I could think of by way of a reply to reassure all my friends, I made a nasty crack then that has unfortunately come true since then. I said, I'm writing this email to all of you to dismiss the baseless rumors. This is 2023 August, okay? I said, I'm writing an email to all of you to dismiss these unfounded and baseless rumors that I have accepted the lead role in a 2023 remake of Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi. I said, it is absolutely untrue that I am going to accept this role. I do not approve of their choice of a leading lady. They have now made the remake with her. Okay. So, anyway, if you're going to look at colonization of knowledge, you've got to look at 3-4 components which are inescapable in any such discussion. The first is, you can't have colonization, you can't have knowledge without information. Information is the raw material of knowledge. Yeah. You all know this and I don't need to tell you, you can have information without knowledge, but you can't have knowledge without information. Right. And the attempts now, whether on Facebook, Meta, Google, how many of us are even aware that in the last 10 years, Google, Meta, Instagram, Twitter, X now, have on demand altered their algorithms at the request of command of the Indian government. The People's Archive of Rural India, which I run, which is a multimedia digital space and which comes out in 16 languages, including Bangla. The People's Archive of Rural India, when the farmers' struggle began in 2020, the one in Delhi, our viewership trebled overnight. Then government issued an order. Twitter closed 80 accounts connected to the farmers. 80 Twitter accounts closed. Then, having done that, they had many pages on Facebook taken down, and with Google, they issued instructions. Something was tweaked in the algorithm, and the number of searches for farmers' protests fell 65%. And we stopped growing. At that point, we reached that. It has taken us many years to come back to that point of readership. All they did was to tweak a little algorithm. Oh, one of the most famous achievements of that year. Do you remember Divya Ravi, the young 17-year-old girl who was arrested in Bangalore? One of the most famous tweets of all time is the tweet by the Delhi police thanking Twitter for, putting out the correct information about that fake toolkit on which they arrested people. They were thanking Twitter for exposing these anti-national elements. Anyway, coming back to this. The media, you as citizens, theoretically at least, you're supposed to receive that information which we process into knowledge through your textbooks, through your media, and I include publishing of textbooks in media. And there is a severe crackdown, a severe distortion, a recolonization of what appears in media, or what appears in your textbooks. And are they going to, what will this happen, what I'm saying about Facebook, Twitter? Yes, it will. They're going to achieve what they want to a very good extent, as, they're making the demand of the social media organizations, of the social media platforms. Please remember, the first thing, as I said, colonization requires information. Second is it requires monopolies. Third, it requires corporatization. Fourth, it requires ever-deepening inequality. All these major social media platforms, incidentally, you can see that they tweaked the algorithm on X during the Delhi struggle of the students in Jantar Mantar. It's astonishing how few were the likes and things coming up on a number of tweets which would normally get 3,400, got 400, 500. So that also happened. Who are these organizations? What do they own? X, you have to understand how big and how powerful these media corporations are. The owner of X is the richest man in the world. His net worth is $1.15 trillion. That is more than the GDP of 181 nations. What terms of exchange are there when he gives a government an order? Or he is going to do what the government wants. He even publicly said, I disagree with India's request for the takedown, but we are doing it in 2024. Yeah? Because his revenue the revenue that is generated from here is greater than any loss of face. Ultimately, when the entire credibility cracks, that's another level, that's another issue. But the corporates involved in social media and in legacy media and in media generally are giant media monopolies whose interests can be harmed by a powerful state seeking propaganda monopoly and political hegemony. It gets even more explicit when modern states function as ideological arms of corporate power, or modern governments function, as one very wise man said more than 100 years ago, as executive committees of corporate interests. Just consider, if you look in the US, it's been going on much longer. From the time of George Bush Sr., the number of CEOs of major companies becoming Secretary of State, becoming Secretary of Defense, becoming Secretary of whatever. It's been huge. George Bush Jr.'s cabinet was dominated by CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. In India, there is practically nothing that the Adanis and Ambanis desire that they will not get. Practically nothing they desire that they won't get. And here too, corporations are the major owners of media. Like in the US, the richest Indian is Mr. Ambani, being overtaken slightly by Mr. Adani, but he is also the biggest media owner in this country. It is no accident that India has been, for years, the largest requester. I love that word, requester. Those are fatwas. The largest requester and enforcer of digital content restrictions in the world. Yeah. And shutdowns in twice in the 2020s onwards, twice. Kashmir went without internet practically for a year, 8 months in the year. Okay. But the request, let me give you some numbers on the request made of Facebook and Twitter. In 2025 alone, just last year, India made more than 1 lakh requests to Meta and Instagram to Meta mainly, for content removal, for blocking of sites, and legal process and demands, for shutting down of accounts. And you know what? The previous year, they were very triumphant because the previous year, across Facebook and Instagram alone, 28,000 accounts were shut down on the demand of the Modi government. India, as the Meta guy told the Hindu this year, India is now among a set of limited countries, I'm quoting, where Facebook and Instagram automatically restrict content on a scale and based on local legal requirements. A company source told the Hindu. The parent firm, Meta is the parent firm of both Instagram and Facebook. It also told the Hindu that it has complied with censorship. Its whistleblowers told that the firm has been hit with a barrage of takedown notices from state police authorities. Remember, there's a Mr. Adityanath not far from Delhi. Yeah, as well as the union government. We will know what happened in 25 end in the next couple of months when Meta puts out its report. Elon Musk's X complies but disagrees with India's order to suspend accounts linked to the farmers' struggles. In 2024, there was a second round of farmers' march on Delhi from Haryana. The way your media was censored, how many people know that we became another great first for India? We became the first nation in the world to use drone warfare against our farmers. Yeah, they had spider drones which clutch up to 8 tear gas canisters. So you're the farmers, that drone comes over you and drops it. One of the reasons it got some news was because one of the canisters hit the head of a journalist. Neither did, so there were clips on social media, everything, many of these were taken down. The scale of censorship, which you never thought possible in the digital era, they're actually proceeding quite effectively in achieving their goals. I have to tell you though that the farmers responded brilliantly. The Gen Z of the farmers, 16 and 17-year-olds, brought down 2 or 3 of the drones by flying kites, and the manja got tangled in the legs of the drone, and they brought down 2 drones. Now see, colonization and monopoly go hand in hand. Yeah. The predecessors to the present media were the giant news agencies. Okay, but we'll come to that again later. Historically, colonial powers asserted their military and other coercive means to establish monopolies in trade, to extract cheap or free labor, and eliminate any competition. Remember the East India Company and Bengal, what it did with the production of salt. It's not just that it forbade others from producing salt or procuring salt on their own. It achieved something much more than that. It achieved life and death control over the actual producers of salt. Yeah? Like it did over the artisans later in the Dhaka muslin and the weaving. But it achieved life and death control over the actual producers, their knowledge and their skills. This kind of link between colonization and control of production of knowledge, a century later, evolved into a system we are still stuck with. Even the WTO goes back to that period. 1893, the Paris Convention, the first codification of patent rights, intellectual property rights, copyrights, designs, and trademarks. They could no colonized nation sat at the table in the Paris Convention. They were colonies. Yeah. They could give themselves the property and intellectual property of the colonized nations. I hope you know that, I'm sure you know that there are several patented versions of and copyrighted versions of yoga, Bikram yoga, for instance. And there are huge copyright battles fought over it in American courts, with damages running to millions awarded to one person or the other for something that evolved here some 2,000 years ago. There was also an attempt to patent the idli. Okay. But, so the Paris Convention started codifying all that. The Paris Convention was what a lot of us were harking to while fighting the WTO in 93-94. I wrote a booklet then, Patent Folly, where I predicted that the world's AIDS problem would be incredibly more severe if India were not able to allow to produce its own generic drug. It actually happened. And only because of the intervention of Nelson Mandela, the American corporations brought it down, their prices, and allowed some versions of, basically it allowed Cipla to produce a life-saving drug at a very cheap rate compared to what it was in the United States. So those links between colonization and control of knowledge would a century later extend into the earliest forms of IPRs at the Paris Convention. But this will amuse you. As early as late 15th and early 16th centuries, the Portuguese attempted to patent and copyright sea routes to India. Here, you have naval power. Portugal was the predominant naval power of the time. The battle for supremacy was going on between the English Navy, which fully used pirates. The English used a lot of pirates. They outsourced their killing and fighting. And the pirates were known as privateers. Polite term, that they were private operators. So we have taken them on contract. Sir Walter Raleigh, all these guys were pirates. Yeah, they were pirates. Anyway, Portugal was the predominant naval power in the Indian Ocean. So it started trying to patent or copyright, I don't know what word applies then, sea routes to India. They had discovered these routes and they saw the money they spent in discovery as an investment. And the first such law anywhere in the world on such a scale was the law of Cartaz. Cartaz in Portuguese. I don't know that I'm pronouncing it right. In 1502, they introduced Cartaz, a trading license or a paid-for sea pass. If you wanted to sail anywhere for trade in the Indian Ocean, you paid the Portuguese a fee. Now, ships sailing around where Portuguese naval power was dominant had to call, mandatorily, they had to call at Portuguese-controlled ports, one of which you all know, Goa. But the other you will really be entertained to know. Which was the other port that you were compelled to, in this part of the world, that you had to stop at if you were in that side? Goa and the Strait of Hormuz. Huh? Yeah. They colonized Albuquerque, colonized Hormuz. And now if you carried goods through these routes that the Portuguese saw violating their rights, their monopoly, it could lead not just to the seizure of goods, it could lead to the execution of your crew. And it did quite often. Yeah, this is state piracy, like you have state terrorism today. Of course, this waned as naval power declined, and you will also be entertained to know that the first attempt to take Hormuz, they were defeated. Second attempt, Albuquerque came back with much bigger naval fleet, captured the little port of Hormuz, and they held it for 100 years. You know how they left? They were kicked on their butts and thrown out of Hormuz by the Iranians. Now the East India Company revived these with deadly monopolies over opium trade. I don't need to tell an audience of this kind the direct links between that monopoly over opium trade and the degradation and humiliation of China and the millions of lives lost in the opium wars. That was there is a serious link between the East India Company's control over that and the subsequent hyper-colonization of China that would follow a few decades later. But let's not forget that we are Indians and we did everything first, we did everything best, we always have, we always will. I mean, if you don't believe me, ask your Prime Minister. Indians are old hands at setting up social monopolies and knowledge censorship. We just called it caste. Okay, that's all. Incidentally, the social monopoly, linguistic monopolies, Europe comes to it much later through Latin. Now, in medieval Europe, you wanted the job, a bureaucratic job, maybe a clerk or a helper in a church, whatever. The basic qualification for getting a job in aristocratic bureaucracies, royal bureaucracies, or state bureaucracies was your knowledge of Latin, because everything had to be done in Latin. I don't know if many of you are aware that in Italy, Mass could be done in Italian only from 1984. Till that year, you had Mass compulsorily only in Latin. Remember, it led to the revolt in Latin America, where the liberation theologists broke away from the main Vatican in order to be able to conduct mass in the languages of the indigenous people of Latin America. So, but, as always, we anticipated all that by 1,500 years. Though, by the way, the word caste is derived from the Portuguese language. Caste is derived from the Portuguese word casta, which means type. The Portuguese understood this because they had something of that system, something like it. Not quite, nobody can match us, but they had something resembling it. And they called it a type. Remember, the colonial powers in the Caribbean went into classifying people by 1/8 of the blood. Quadroons, quarterloons. That's how people were actually classified. Yeah. But here, let me establish India's claim to fame and as pioneers. I quote for you from chapter 12 of the Gautama Smriti, one of the most important and early Dharma Shastras. The language of control, the vehicle, was not Latin, obviously, it was Sanskrit. And here is what the Gautama Smriti, chapter 12, 4, 5 and 6 tell you. A Shudra who listens intentionally to a recitation of the Veda, his ears shall be filled with molten tin or lac. You can get this, by the way, from the Hindu Dharma website. I took it from there. But it's also in George Buller's original translation of the Dharma Shastras, which you will get from Motilal Banarsi Das and Son, and which I've had for 30 years with me. 5. If he recites Vedic texts, the Shudra, his tongue shall be cut out. 6. If he still remembers what he knows, if he still remembers the text, his body shall be split in twain. Please remember, our epics are full of stories of the enforcement of this. Rama and Shambhuka. Remember, a Brahmin went to Rama after his triumphant return from Lanka and said, my son died because you are allowing Shudras to say prayers so purely, so cleanly, that the guy is about to enter heaven. Rama went and confronted Shambhuka, who said without a trace of dishonesty, yes sir, I want to get out of the wretchedness of being a Shudra, so I am making these prayers. The gods above were all very troubled because you see the thought of a Shudra entering heaven was too much. So Rama slew Shambhuka, slashed his head off on the spot. Okay. Even more important, a story which all of you know, Drona, Arjuna and Eklavya. Yeah. How you restrict knowledge, how you restrict transfer of technology. Drona was deeply disturbed to find that Eklavya, a Dalit, a Shudra, whatever he was not a Brahmin, he was not a Kshatriya, was far superior to Arjun as an archer. So as Guru Dakshina, he demanded his thumb. Eklavya knew that without the thumb, there was no more archery. But he gave his thumb. And a couple of months ago, there is this passage from the venerable sage Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who, I credit with founding the School of the Art of Taking. And he upholds and he praises Drona and says, in this story, Drona is commonly viewed as being cruel and self-centered. This is not true. But when one looks at it from the point of view of the wise, Drona did Eklavya a favor. He made him famous. When people think of discipline and devotion, they don't think of Arjun, they think of Eklavya, who was honest to his guru. He was told, you have to lose this knowledge, you have to lose this skill and prowess, and he lost it. If it were not for this incident, says Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, I'm quoting verbatim. If it were not for this incident, nobody would ever have known Eklavya. Though on the outside it seemed as if Dronacharya had done injustice, actually Dronacharya uplifted Eklavya from just being a student to becoming an epitome of discipleship. Dronacharya granted immortality to Eklavya by asking him for his thumb. So when people think of devotion, they think, okay, never mind, that's about as much as my stomach can take. But now we come to say systems and structures and sanctifying of knowledge. Indian knowledge systems have long been a mixture of acute brilliance and baffling bogus elegance. Yeah. I think one of the people who writes best about this was Al-Baruni in Kitabul Hind. He is not mocking or putting you down. He is astonished at the sophistication of intellect and says he can't understand why these guys mix such superstition and rubbish with knowledge. And he also concludes that the divisions of caste have damaged scientific knowledge in India very severely. He actually says that. Al-Baruni. Mind you, he came with Muhammad of Ghazni. He was an Iraqi. He was a Persian. He came with Muhammad of Ghazni. I have actually visited his grave and placed a wreath of flowers on him because as a student of history in JNU, I was astonished by the power of Al-Baruni, who also had to quote things with Islam because he was going to get his head cut off if he did otherwise. But he kept talking about, he's nowhere denying the knowledge and the intellect and the intelligence. He just says they kill it themselves. I'm paraphrasing. So, other Greek philosophers who accompanied Alexander say similar things. Once Criticus says that they're talking to these Brahmins they call them the sophists. That's how the word came. And he says, a mix of sophistication and pure rubbish. Now the attempts to restrict science to elite groups, the damaging nature of caste, is what... But while the caste system did enormous damage to the evolution of Indian sciences and knowledge systems, all, even those not falling within its power, were seriously damaged. I mean, there were some systems outside the caste power, but everybody was damaged by the coming of colonialism. This was not in India alone. It happened across every colonized nation. The damage in India was greatly enhanced by enforced stagnation of the caste system, restriction of knowledge, and more. Now let's say you look at university research centers. I'm just coming to that because today every one of us is embroiled in one fight or the other over that. The dominant knowledge systems of the world today are clearly, we just satisfy ourselves by saying they are all dominant of Western origin. I've got news for you. They are not just of Western origin. They are more and more increasingly of corporate design and control. The systems of knowledge. And I come to what all the journals that you guys have to, use in your approved list of peer-reviewed journals in universities. I'll come to that in a moment. See, knowledge has been, I said, information, knowledge, monopolies, corporatization, privatization. Knowledge has been perhaps the most affected by the deadly wave of privatizations of the past 50 years in the West, 35 years in India. Look, even the most relatively democratic systems like our institutions, repositories is the more correct word, even the more relatively democratic repositories like Wikipedia construct requirements that severely restrict or simply rule out countless thousands of non-Western voices, as AI is now being programmed to do. For instance, its requirement or insistence of citations and published sources. I have no solution for this problem. I just wish that all of us would think about it. How, for instance, would that reflect the voices of many former colonies who do not follow the literary or textual traditions of the West? How would it reflect today the voices of Palestinians in their struggle? All the citations which will come from historical sources are the clerks and colonels of colonial power. That's who they are. Right? So you're going to, tomorrow when we are writing the Indian history itself, so severely understates what the British really did. Yeah. And even if you look at their own sources, it's horrible. But the fact is, how much of Indian sources you were denied. We don't even know what was there that we didn't have and didn't get, because they were simply rooted out. As much as it affected the tellings, by the way, my dear friend and colleague, Professor Madhushri Mukherjee is here, who wrote that book on Churchill's Secret War. It's an example of how to use the sources of the colonial power in many ways, plus she has brought in other sources. I generally think it's a great example for everyone to learn from. Now, I don't, in the tellings of Indian history, which are the official and published or cited sources? Where do they come from? 8 out of 10, you can check where they come from. Now, the section would be the internal causes. Now, after the period of physical colonization, the internal colonization of the Indian mind unfolds not only through the market, but also through the Hindutva erasure of serious content in the school and college textbooks, which every one of you is now struggling with, grappling with, and replacing their mythologies, replacing the old, with mythologies that fit very well, in my mind, they fit very well with those of the British Raj. After all, who was responsible for India's degradation and downfall? Muslims. So says the British Raj, so say the Hindutva Raj, the Modi Raj, and all this is being done in the textbooks in the name of decolonization. It is a recolonization. Yeah? It's being done in the name of, a lot of us laugh, I sometimes think prematurely, when Kangana Ranaut declared that India obtained Azadi only in 2014. You can laugh, it might be the content of tomorrow's textbooks. Yeah, it could be in tomorrow's textbooks. So you have that issue before you. That insanity could very well come into the textbooks. One of the most important corporate colonizations within the existing, and this is why I chose this topic for an audience like this, one of the most important corporate colonizations within the existing and dominant capitalist systems is the corporate corralling of academic knowledge. Consider that the greatest peer-reviewed journals, the ones universities demand their faculty and researchers populate their work with, especially private universities. And private universities are proliferating much faster than state-run universities in India. all these platforms of peer-reviewed journals, they are corporate owned. And that not just by any corporates, but by corporates with extremely strong links, even ownership, by big pharma companies, biotech companies, companies with huge investments in AI, and companies and corporations listed in the Fortune 500 list. Okay? You know, if we take just the top 10 academic publishing world, in the academic publishing market, we're talking about Springer, Nature, Wiley, Elsevier primarily. The total annual revenue of the academic publishing market at the top 10 or 12 is around $20 billion. Elsevier, its revenue alone in 2025 was creeping up on $3 billion. Who is Elsevier? Remember, every one of you is familiar with the word Lancet. Lancet is owned by Elsevier. Yeah. Lancet was, by the way, a radical journal like The Economist in its origins. The Economist, which today supports the war on Iran, was a radical journal started by a guy and his brother-in-law who were appalled by the poverty and squalor of the Industrial Revolution. So 1841, Economist comes down, and one of the most famous sayings of its founding editor was, you cannot explain hunger to the rich. If you tell the rich about people being hungry, they will be perplexed and wonder why, if somebody is hungry, they don't just ring the bell for the butler. That was one of the two founder editors of The Economist. Look at The Economist today, saying inequality is a figment, a fiction. That is The Economist today. Company, corporate owned. But come back to Elsevier. Elsevier is owned by the RELX group, as in, I don't know the full expansion of the acronym, but its related websites, RELX websites, related websites, describe it as a multinational information and analytics company. RELX is publicly traded in the London, New York, Amsterdam, and several other stock exchanges. Elsevier is very important to you guys. Scopus Index, Scopus journals, all are owned by Elsevier. The Scopus Index is from Elsevier. Elsevier's own website tells us its catalog lists 3,000 academic journals and publications that it owns. Elsevier owns 3,000 academic publications, and which includes, by the way, Lancet. Elsevier is deeply into data analytics, using AI to evaluate, and that's another very important subject for all of you, please. Every one of you who goes back to your college and wonders how to correct papers that you know have 99% been written by AI. Right? Is that not a struggle you face? If you don't, either you're not working or Bengal is a unique place. Now, Elsevier, in its data analytics avatar, uses AI to evaluate and even benchmark research publications. Elsevier was rocked by scandal when it was shown to be running at least six sponsored journals that were paid for by Big Pharma. camouflaged as peer-reviewed medical journals. Of course, it made the righteous noises. Among the many platforms owned by Elsevier is Scopus. People are generally familiar with the Scopus index. If you're working in a private university, you'll be absolutely familiar with it. Today for an Indian academic, making a Scopus mark is far more important than publishing a really good paper on EPW. In fact, once we had a UGC list, we still do, of peer-reviewed journals. Even those have undergone significant change. You see the kind of journals that come. But now we have the Scopus Index journals, which every private university is adopting without critical look. Well, there's another thing to do with this. These peer-reviewed journals are predatory money makers. So today, I think there are very few people from private universities in this audience. Okay, but let me tell you how it works in any of the private universities. And anyone who wants a citation in the publication in the Scopus Index journals, there are about several hundreds. If a journal from the Scopus Index accepts your paper for publication, you then pay a journal processing fee. Yeah? A journal processing fee, and this is easily 1 lakh rupees or more. You're a small bloody lecturer, assistant professor, newly appointed in, BML, Munjal University or wherever you happen to fall off the skies into. Yeah? 1 lakh or more to get your accepted paper, your peer-reviewed and accepted paper, for that to be published. There's a processing fee. 1 lakh is more than you spent on creating the research for that paper. And the result is, it's turning universities all over the third world into paper mills. Okay? Creating mills, papers targeted at getting published in Scopus. So you have fraud, bogus data, plagiarism, fake peer reviews. Half a dozen vice chancellors in the Modi era have had to resign. Some because they didn't have a PhD at all. Some because their PhDs were fake. Some because their PhDs were plagiarized. Some because they didn't even have a basic BA degree. See, actually, I have given my sympathetic advice to Dharmendra Pradhan on his resignation. I've said to Mr. Pradhan, you should now take a study break and acquire a master's in entire political science. Yeah. There is only one other human being in the planet who has got a master's in entire political science. There isn't even a professor in the subject. But Mr. Modi has an MA in entire political science. And my advice to Pradhan is that if you take this sabbatical and do this, you can return and aspire for much higher posts than education minister. But subsequently, I am suggesting that the entire cabinet go on that, join him on the sabbatical. The kind of fraud that it has brought to Indian academia, the kind of fraud, 2025, 24, 23, India is the top country in the world after China in 2 years in retraction of research papers. Okay? In retraction of research papers. The top 10 institutions in the world that retracted research papers in 2025, 6 were Indian universities. 6 of the 10. No? Anyway, so just as academicians, as teachers, as lecturers, consider the language of the education system, how it has changed over the past decades. Words we never, and I don't mean just the Modi era, started well enough in the Congress period. Words that we never associated with schools or universities are now part of our everyday language. They've captured the imagination of university administrators, global competencies, digital literacy, stakeholders, deliverables, key performance indicators, best practices, governance. Universities today are about governance, not about knowledge of teaching or learning. Okay, they're about governance and consultancies. When I was doing my MPhil PhD, which I never completed in JNU, every third PhD was about land reform, poverty, deprivation. By the late 1990s, the PhDs were essentially aiming for consultancies with World Bank or IMF or someone like that. The nature of what was being studied for your PhD had dramatically undergone change. And lastly, we come to AI, the ultimate colonization of knowledge. What is the task, or what is this AI? What is this artificial intelligence? Let me sum it up in the words of the champions of it. See that I'm paraphrasing. I can say that the task or duty or giant endeavor of AI is to gather the sum total of all knowledge and experience and ideas and thoughts and actions of all of humanity across millennia and monetize it for a bunch of billionaires. Here there are serious questions of public ownership we must raise. That belongs to global humanity. How does Elon Musk or Zuckerberg get to make money out of the knowledge of millennia of Indians, researchers, philosophers, millions of Greek researchers, philosophers, Egyptians, Chinese? You're taking the sum total of the knowledge, and this is in their own, I'm putting together from their own saying, of all humanity, and then my words, you're monetizing that for a bunch of billionaires, and you've even made one of them a trillionaire. Thank you. In doing this, AI will create the largest repositories of information ever known, drawing and sucking into all systems of knowledge, but clearly privileging some systems over others. It will also drive towards homogenizing of knowledge. Let me say very frankly that in the People's Archive of Rural India, at least I try keeping the position and that we can use AI where it replaces drudgery, where it replaces robotic work, where it replaces repetitive stress chores. I myself, I forgot to bring it today, it's lying in the hotel room. I use an AI recorder because it can transcribe and translate and give me the text in 112 languages. It makes errors, but I'm not using it to write for me. I'm using it to know what I said at your meeting. And it actually transcribes from 112 languages. Now, a caution about auto translations and stuff. I did a piece once for Le Monde Diplomatique on farmers' suicides in India, which they liked very much and distributed to a number of their sister publications. Le Monde Diplomatique translated my piece into French, and I'm told they did it very well. I don't know. But obviously, a lot of very serious people told me it was great. Then they give it to sister publications who retranslate, all that auto-translate into English. What it did to that piece beginning with what it did to me. I was the editor of, I was the Hindu's editor, I was editor Rural Affairs, the Hindu. Editor Rural Affairs became director of rural relationships. You know, making me feel like, say, I was the chief executive of Shadi.com or BharatMatrimony.com. Now, let's say, I'm very proud to tell you that, I'll come to that in a minute because I have another colleague who's doing astonishing work for us. But now, as I understand, and I don't want to cause a riot, Bengali is spoken in different ways within the state of Bengal. Right? I mean, I've heard of Rauri, Barendri, Jharkhandi, Rajbanshi, and then there are broad classifications of Chalti Bhasha and Sadhu Bhasha. Okay. Now, AI translation is not going to take note of any of these nuances. It is going to standardize it to the dominant spoken Bengali. To those who are, yeah. AI will homogenize the language. Whether it's Bhojpuri or, it will not take that if it's doing Hindi. It's not profitable to have 37 ways of speaking Hindi. It's not profitable. That doesn't work. It will homogenize that knowledge in the image of the dominant one. By the way, if you ask ChatGPT about Gaza, come and see what its essays it will give you. AI has no independent analytical tool nor a moral or ethical compass to guide it. It is you who have to guide that and use it for purposes which are ethical, practical, and beneficial. I'm very proud to tell you that in Pari we published the only journalism website in the world publishing independent output. Now, BBC publishes in 40 languages output. But what you get in, say, BBC Bangla will not be 5% of what you get in BBC English. In Pari, we publish in 16 languages and we do not do this kind of director of rural relationships translation. My colleague Smita Kator, who sits here, has built, she has had construct a very large edifice of translations that are of the highest quality. And guess what it has done to us? It has made us the target of 1,000 bots, which are plundering from Pari every day. I wake up, why? Because we have placed ourselves as Creative Commons. Anyone can use our copy. I wake up and look at the analytics and find, yesterday the top 7 cities that who used Pari, all the top 7 cities are in China. Okay. One day it will be Singapore, and 2 days it will be California and Seattle. Because the bots are sucking the blood out of high quality translation, which Smita presides over and really is the architect of in Pari. Now, what is the purpose, what the philosophical purpose of AI and the financial purpose of AI, we know. What do the actual pioneers of AI, OpenAI you've all heard of, Sam Altman, I'm quoting him verbatim, what he wants AI to do, what he wants from AI. Sam Altman, CEO, OpenAI, this is what he says AI is meant to do. We see a future where intelligence is just another utility, like electricity or water, and people buy it from us based on a meter. One critic has critiqued it beautifully, saying, if intelligence is just another utility like water and electricity, it raises nightmares of what happens when people are unable to pay their intelligence bills. What, do they shut off your intelligence? What do they do if that happens? Now, one of the most, then he continues, we have a fundamental belief in the abundance of intelligence. One of the most important things in the future is that we make intelligence, to borrow an old phrase, too cheap to meter. That was how nuclear power was sold in the 70s by the United States Defense Department and General Electric. That it is so beneficial, so prolific, and it will create so much, and it's clean energy, that the cost of metering it will be the only cost involved. So we won't meter it, it will be given out free. That was the pipe dream given, and which a lot of us in our teens in the 70s marveled at, goggled at. India's biggest problem with AI. Watch this space carefully. Caste and AI. In India, caste is very deeply embedded in AI. Look, what does AI do? It models our society. And you know what it's going to get if it models us. You shouldn't be surprised. It models our society, which means essentially it models the dominant strengths and the dominant sections of society. Please remember, AI is modeling us as a society. Who will they model? Look at the examples. The Times of India carried, I'm astonished that the Times of India carried that piece. It must have got in by accident. The ChatGPT was asked to match surnames with occupations. It readily matched Bansal. Bansal is a banya. It readily matched Bansal with scientist, dentist and financial analyst. It was asked to match Ahirwar. That is a Dalit surname. It immediately matched Ahirwar with manual scavenger, plumber and construction worker. Okay? So if AI is modeling us, who are the authors of AI itself? What are their social backgrounds? It is very stupid to think that caste affects everything in our lives, but not AI and not media. That is really stupid thinking. Okay? AI will reflect and reinforce all the prejudices in our society, and that becomes sanctified knowledge. Rubbish now comes with an aura, a halo, an aura of authenticity. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but the Supreme Court is having to pass regulations because of the number of fake cases coming with fake precedents stated, with decisions stated from cases that never existed. Are you aware of this? Supreme Court has actually said it will not accept AI in the petitions. It will not accept that because it's undermining the entire basis of jurisprudence. You're faking. There is also the Hindutvavadi who got a contract from UGC. I don't have the proof for this. The Supreme Court, I have the proof, but this I have no reason to doubt. In the UGC, in creating the curriculum for Vedic maths, gave out the contract to some Sanghi to, one of the things in the role was in the curriculum to give 10 titles of books, must-read books. He did that. He put it to ChatGPT. It gave him 10 titles. Only problem, 4 of those books don't exist. You asked ChatGPT for 10 titles, it gave you 10 titles. ChatGPT hallucinates. Everybody knows that. Many of the AI systems hallucinate. You're asking them to think, they're thinking and telling you. Right. Supreme Court, this CJI has said he is extremely worried about the fake cases and fake conclusions. It's a giant problem for all of you with students doing they are giving dangerous medical opinions online, which people go and seek and then act on. And they do this with a halo of veneer of scientificity and so what can we do about this in conclusion? The first thing is you better realize that all that's happening happens within and cannot happen without that framework of incredible inequality in Indian society, which actually declined between 1950s and 1980 in income terms, and then explodes after we embrace the so-called new economic policies that are now all of 35 years old. Yeah. In 1991, when we embraced the Brave New World, India did not have a single dollar billionaire, not one. Today, and I mean today because I look at the Forbes live list of billionaires. You know, I know that Mr. Adani got added $500 million today, this morning. Today we have 226 billionaires whose net asset worth is 1.015 trillion. They're not far off from Elon Musk, collectively speaking, right? So this is when you have that kind of inequality, when you have that kind of horrible gaps, yeah, and where the real wages of hundreds of millions of people have not risen at all, then you will have all the other problems that we spoke of. I just want to tell you about the People's Archive of Rural India, and anyone can take these visiting cards. Some of them, unfortunately, only some of them, have one of the first things you're going to have to do is to build a different universe of media. Please don't keep calling this media mainstream media. I don't see how someone who excludes 85% of the Indian population are mainstream. Yeah. The correct term for them is corporate media. The second thing you need to understand, there's a world of difference between media and journalism. Media are corporations. They have to be analyzed, looked at like corporations. It is not the duty of the media to inform the public. It is not the duty of the media to build democracy. The duty of the media is to build the profits of its owners. Yeah? And they do pretty well at that. Your media today are worth 2.78 trillion rupees, which is more than the GDP of 73 nations. Right? So, what are the things we have to do? One, we have to build an independent channel of knowledge, not controlled by the Elsevier's, the Scopus Index, but we have to build more open access journals ourselves. They can be small. Look, EPW is a very small thing. What a role it has played historically. I'm not in consonance with it as it is today, but what a role it has played historically. Small journals make a huge difference. The largest journal Gandhi ever edited had a maximum highest print order of 12,000. No more. There are things that we all need to sit and do. Build that alternative universe. Not even the universe, because the so-called universe is not occupied except by a very small person. Today, the AI, our stories, our lives, our knowledge, in People's Archive of Rural India, I promise you, 25 years from now, anyone wanting to know how Indians in this period lived, worked, ate, sang, drank, died, they have only Pari to turn to, no one else. If they turn to newspapers to look at what happened, how did Indians look 25 years ago, they will conclude that every Indian looked like Salman Khan or Katrina Kaif. And every politician looked like Modi or Shah, except for the occasional Rahul Gandhi's face popping up. Now, all our stories are being appropriated by the bot, by the AI, who will then charge you for the information into which our money and our work went. Yeah. And then one day they will sue us for infringement of copyright. Be very sure of it. That happens. So this is also the greatest period of challenge for us intellectually, academically. How do we build our intellectual, academic self-defense against this kind of a world? Of course, for lack of time, I'm not going into the biggest damage that AI is going to do you, but I will say two lines. We are trying to be the nation on earth that invites and sets up the largest number of data centers, especially AI data centers. An average small medium data center takes more water and electricity than a bloody township of 60,000 people. Yeah. In a country where 60% of the population is admitted by the government officially to be facing water stress, we are going to introduce the data centers in a big way. A battle is going on in Visakhapatnam just now between Google, Adani and Dalit farmers of that region. Remember, India generates 20% of the world's data, but has the capacity to store only 1.2%. So all these guys are yelling. All our, charismatic capitalists are yelling. We should get more. Data centers consume 150 billion liters of water in 2024 and is projected to take 360 billion liters of water in the next 4 years. Okay. You need to fight against one. This is going to be the biggest hit to rural India in the next 5 years. Look at the silence of the economists who keep telling us, oh, Punjab farmers, they are depleting the water table. They should stop doing that. But you're willing to give 20, 100 times that amount of water to the corporations. Those who advise economists abroad who advise Indian farmers to diversify, don't tell us. They're saying, oh yeah, there will be no problem of electricity because 51% by law must come from renewable sources. Do you know that that means if you do it with solar panels, you will need 5 times the land that regular electricity does. Yeah, 5x. So with all these things coming, first, defend your right to knowledge. Yeah. Defend your right to independent analysis. Defend your right to not have something imposed on your brain. As I said, those kids fighting in Delhi did us all a favor. Yeah, they did that. They just refused. They refused to recognize any kind of rules that they were told were the rules. You have to defend your intellectual self-health, your mental health, your intellectual health, all of these. You have to fight monopolies. You have to completely learn how to increasingly isolate the big media, the corporate media. One of the things that came out of the Delhi struggle, have you ever seen those TV anchors look more like idiots? We all knew they were idiots. But the way they looked like idiots to a lot more people this time. We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to build repositories of knowledge. And that is what People's Archive of Rural India is about. We are building repositories of languages. We have a program on endangered languages, languages that could be dead by the next census or two. You need to build those independent repositories of knowledge. You need to go back to the days of the library movement and the small journals movement. We need to do all of this, but it cannot be done if we accept the given frameworks of market, choice, free market capitalism. Then you can't do it. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. Will it be done? Well, things will get a lot better before they get worse. They'll get a lot worse before they get better. But it can be done. I believe it will be done. Thank you.